We're continuing our study in the book by Chuck Swindoll, Moses, a Man of Selfless Dedication. We're coming down to the end. I don't know if the clock is going to behave itself, and we're going to do 3 chapters in one day. We're just going to take our time, all right? It's the story of an angry man. I want to review this because this is really the climax of Moses' life. Climax meaning not the high point, like this is the best, but like in a Greek drama, the hero always dies. Okay, so that's what's happening, and this is written like a Greek drama. The climax is when he hits that rock. So we're going to talk again about the story of an angry man. We're going to review that last one, the rebellious anger. And there were 2 things that came out of that episode, 2 reasons that Moses could not enter into the promised land. Number 1, he had a breach in his faith. And number 2, he distracted from the glory of God in front of those 2 million people. And anger is what drove both of those things. It was his anger that caused those things, that caused him to forfeit his entrance into that promised land. Now, I want to read these again, if the only reason is that anger is my Achilles heel. All right? I don't want one moment of anger or pride or arrogance to cast a shadow over a lifetime of walking with my Lord. Moses, 120 years, the last 80 years was his walk with the Lord. And that one breach caused him some grief. Frankly, I fear that possibility. And you know what? I want to fear that possibility because when I stop fearing it, I'm in grave danger. So, filling the shoes of Moses, 2 names emerge because in this situation, he sent the 12 spies, the 12 come back, 10 of them say, besides, we saw giants there. On the other hand, Joshua and Caleb, they were among those 12, and they said, the land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Now, I don't know about the Hebrew, but in the Greek, when they use that word if, it could mean a conditional, like if I'm late, start the class without me, or it could mean since. Okay? So in this case, it works both ways. If conditionally, if the Lord delights in us, but if they have super duper strong faith, you could say since the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land. So when did the 2 names emerge? The situation of the spies was early in the Exodus process, and they were both counted early. We just talked about them talking about actually rebutting the other 10. But then over the next 40 years, the elders would die off. The fighting men would die off. Only Joshua and Caleb would survive. Your dead body shall fall in this wilderness, and of all your numbers listed in the census from 20 years old and upward who have grumbled against me, not one shall come into the land where I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. So both Joshua and Caleb were worthy to be the next leader. Well, let's take a look at Caleb. And somebody would say, in fact, I have my firstborn grandson, his name is Caleb. And one day he's like 24, 25 right now. One day he came up to me and said, why would my parents name me Dog? I said, it's because of the attributes of a dog. They're loyal, they're friendly, they're courageous, they defend, and Caleb, this one, did all those things. If you study Caleb's life, he was 85 years old when he finally got to go into the promised land. And just like Moses at 120, they said of Caleb that he still had the strength of a 40-year-old. And they said to him, well, what kind of real estate would you like to have? He said, I'll take Hebron, the land of the giants. He was not afraid to go after it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and followed me fully, I will bring into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it. We're going to read that both Caleb and Joshua followed the Lord completely. Holy is the word that they use. And then there's Joshua. Jehovah saves. And the young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying against them. We covered this thing when we talked about one of the perils where he would be jealous. And Moses set that thing straight. And he said, don't worry about those two prophesying over there. I'd just as soon all 2 million people would prophesy. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the assistant of Moses from his youth. That was the tiebreaker. When we take a look at all of the things that Joshua did leading up to his appointment, you can understand why Joshua was selected. He got the press, all right? What about Moses? We're here talking about somebody filling the shoes of Moses. What about Moses? And there you see Moses sitting on Mount Pisgah, and he's looking out over the land of Israel. And we're going to have a map up here shortly, and you're going to say, well, if that's north and this is the Dead Sea, what's all this foliage? Because that's desert. It turns out that when the Islamic people ruled over Israel, they raised a tree tax that lasted for several hundred years. You had to pay a tax for every tree. So guess what you do to avoid the taxes? You cut down the trees. And so when Moses was there was beautiful foliage. If you were standing on Mount Pisgah before 1948, you would see nothing but rocks. But now over time, the Israelis are bringing that land back, but not like Jesus is going to bring it back. When he brings it back, the Bible says water will flow out from underneath the threshold of the temple, and it will flow east and it will flow west. And even the Dead Sea will be cleaned up so that there'll be fish in there. What about Moses? The Lord's work moves on. When a man of God dies or he moves on, nothing of God dies or moves on. The Lord said to Moses, go up into this mountain of Abiram and see the land that I have given to the people of Israel. And when you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people as your brother Aaron was, because you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin, when the congregation quarreled, failing to uphold me as holy as the waters before their eyes. Now, God was not cruel when he said, I'm going to let you see the land, but you're not going to have it. Now, it would be cruel of me if I took my grandkids to an ice cream stand and I say, you want to see this ice cream cone? Too bad for you. That wasn't the point. What Moses was doing, what God was doing, he was affirming his word. He said, I'm going to take those people out of bondage and give them that land flowing full of milk and honey. And God is saying to Moses, and I'm going to do it. Now, there's Moses, and he's looking out over the promised land. And in a few clicks, we're going to have the actual verbiage. What God is saying to Moses, I want you to start here and just pan your eyes. He said, over there is Bethel. That's where Abraham first came to the promised land. That's where Jacob, he was in that piece of real estate several times, but that's where Jacob met the God of the house of God. Keep in mind, he's going to write Genesis, and maybe God's given him a look at the map so the whole thing could open up before his eyes. And he says, down there is Hebron. That's the burial place. Remember, you've read many, many times the God of Abraham and Isaac and of Jacob. That's where all those guys are buried, and their wives. And there's Bethlehem. That's where Rachel is also buried, but it's the birthplace of David, and it's the birthplace of the Messiah. Can you imagine Moses sitting on that rock thinking about this stuff? He said, and there's Jerusalem. That's Calvary. He was on Sinai. You could see Calvary. And ultimately, it's the capital city of the Messianic kingdom. And God's spelling all this stuff out for Moses. So what's Moses' reaction? We know at one point he said, God, can you please change your mind? The Bible says the Lord's anger was kindled against him, and he said, basically the same thing what Pontius Pilate said, what I have written, I have written. God said, no way, don't even pray about that anymore. But this is Moses' reaction. Moses spoke to the Lord saying, let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the kingdom. Keep in mind what we're talking about is filling the shoes of Moses. Let the Lord appoint a man who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be as sheep that have no shepherd. What were the qualifications that Moses wanted to lay on his successor? Number one, God's man. And number two, a man with the heart of a shepherd. He didn't need to have all of the education that came from Egypt like Moses did. He didn't need to be mighty in word and in speech because God's going to take care of all those kinds of things. All Moses said was, God, you pick the man and give him the heart of a shepherd. So who was Joshua? First, we've seen where he is the assistant of Moses from his youth. He was a leader in battle. The very first battle that they faced was against the Amalekites. Keep in mind, when that Exodus journey started, the Bible says that God told them not to go on the north way because they would face the Philistines and they would retreat because of war. Well, after some time, they were ready for war, and Joshua was that leader. Whenever Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered his hands, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side, so his hands were steady until going down of the sun. In the times of Hebrews, the way people prayed is they raised their hands and they would look up to heaven. But after a while, Moses, even with his strength at 120 years old, his arms got tired. Now, I don't know if any of you ever had to play basketball, but before we started, they made us put our hands out and do circles and this and that. And after a while, my arms hurt. Nobody came and held them up. Of course, there was no battle going on. But Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. So he was Moses' assistant from the youth. He was a leader in battle. He was the only one allowed on Mount Sinai. If you recall, the Bible says that don't let any of the people touch it or even any of his animals because they're going to die. But Joshua was allowed. The Lord said to Moses, come up to see me on the mountain and wait there that I may give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandment, which I have written for their instruction. So Moses rose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up into the mountain of God. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us what experience Joshua had along with Moses. It doesn't say that Joshua saw the backside of God. It doesn't say that Joshua saw the Lord, engraving the tablets, but he was there. Keep in mind what was happening down on the plain. There was thunder, and there was lightning, and there was earthquake, and there was the pounding of the Lord's voice. Yet Joshua was up in the mountain. He was a man of prayer and worship. And as we're going through these qualifications, keep in mind, Moses only asked for two. That the Lord appoint him, and he have the heart of a shepherd. But as we go through these things, what we're also learning are some of the qualifications for a candidate in leadership. Now, when we select a pastor, we're not going to look for one who's good with the sword, like bullet number 2. The pastors fight a spiritual battle that we know nothing about. Moses' assistant, a leader in battle, the only one allowed on Sinai, and a man of prayer and worship. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. And when all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise up and worship each at his tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses turned again into the camp, his assistant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Moses had his time of prayer. Moses had his communion with God. When Moses was done, Joshua didn't have enough of it yet. And we don't know how long he would hang around, but he did longer than the average. So he was a man of prayer and worship. He was a man of faith and courage. We already talked about this word if. And if Joshua had a ton of faith, you could translate that, since the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land. He was also a man full of spirit and wisdom. If you study Acts chapter 6, the selection of the deacons, that's the same bullet, the selection of the deacons, especially with Stephen. But Joshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom. And he was a man who wholly followed the Lord. What did Joshua need? There are three things that he needed on top of this laundry list. The first two are encouragement and strength. Now, God would encourage Joshua, but where did Joshua also need his encouragement from? The people, exactly right. But charge Joshua and encourage and strengthen him. Well, this is speaking to Moses, and so Moses is getting his charge, and Moses, because he's writing this stuff down, is giving that same charge to the people. Moses, encourage and strengthen him, for he shall go over at the head of his people, and he shall put them in possession of the land that you shall only see. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, be strong and courageous. What are the three add-ons that Joshua needed? Encouragement, strength, and courage. If we're praying for a pastor, I'll tell you the big three you can start on. You can add on to that if you've got the time. Encouragement, strength, and courage. For you shall go with this people into the land that the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall put them in possession of it. So that was Moses' charge. Now we're talking about God's charge. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. You've seen that verse before, haven't you? It's in Hebrews. I'll neither leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous. Remember those three things: encouragement, strength, and courage. We're going to see God's bringing this out in a big way. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Encouragement, strength, and courage to the hilt. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law that Moses, my servant, commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth. You shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. I bring this from the King James only because first Bible verse my Rebecca got to memorize. And she memorized it in this version. Have not I commanded thee? Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee, whithersoever thou goest. There was a chapter in our life when I lost my job and we had to move to Maryland for a little bit of time. And Maryland was so foreign to us that I said, we're moving back. But at any rate, Rebecca, new school, no friends, no church, everything was foreign to her, and she was on shaky ground. I said, Rebecca, this is the one. Have not I commanded thee? Be strong and of good courage. Neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee, whithersoever thou goest. Lessons learned. We're talking about filling the shoes of Moses. They're big shoes to fill. Number one, when God removes, he replaces. So the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Ordination. Make him stand before Eleazar the priest and all the congregation, and you shall commission him in their sight. Here's Moses, the bona fide leader of the 2 million people, even though they never did quit grumbling. And Moses is going to show the people in no uncertain terms, this is the man. So when God removes, he replaces. Number two, when God appoints, he approves. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua 14 times, you see the phrase, the Lord said to Joshua. Now, Joshua, we don't know who wrote the book of Joshua, but Joshua not only needed encouragement, strength, and courage, he, just like the rest of us, needs some direction from the Lord. And so, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I'm going to give them to the people of Israel. When God appoints, he approves. And he didn't just approve. What he said to Joshua was, get the ark ready. Let the Levites go and stand in the Jordan, and the wall of water, the Bible says the river will stand up on a heap. Now, it wasn't a drought. The water table wasn't low. It was actually flood time, and the water stood up. So Moses ordained him in the sight of the people, and the Lord showed the people a sign that he's the man. When God appoints, he approves. And when God sustains, the leader succeeds. This comes from Acts. Our fathers in turn brought it, speaking of the Ark of the Covenant, and when our fathers in turn brought it with Joshua when they dispossessed the nations that God drove out before our fathers.